What's up, everybody? Jeff here, and today we're going to be talking about the Neverborn. So, if you're not familiar with this series, what I'm going to do is go through each of the masters and crews from the Neverborn, tell you a little bit about their backstory, a little bit about why I think they're cool, while we show off some pictures so that you can get a feel for how they look. On top of that, I'm going to have Brandon from the Danger Planet give you a little breakdown on how they play in the game, and hopefully, altogether, this will help you decide which of these masters is your favorite and which one you want to pick up to start playing. If you haven't already seen it, I did a video like this to help you choose which of the factions you like the best. And so far, we've done an episode like this on a ton of the other factions, so be sure to check those out as well if you're interested. On top of that, if you find any of these masters interesting, then be sure to check out the individual videos that I've done about the masters' lore, so you can learn a lot more about their backstory and what they've been up to in the last handful of years in Malifaux. While you're watching, be sure to get down in the comments below and let me know which of these masters you like the best and why. But now, let's get right into the Neverborn. Pandora likes to stalk the streets of Malifaux City and play with her human victims. These games involve torturing and tormenting any humans she encounters, and she can never seem to get enough of it. She carries around a mysterious puzzle box, and when she opens it, her sorrows flood out and feed on the sadness and depression of others. Unbeknownst to most, perhaps even Pandora herself, the box was actually the prison inside which the tyrant Despair was trapped. Pandora had long been an ally of Lilith's, and she agreed to work with Zarya, as it usually allowed her access to more humans to torment. But over time, Pandora would more regularly find herself looking up from inside the box as opposed to the other way around. With him exerting more and more control over her, Despair soon drove her into a conflict with the tyrant Fortune, and as a result, she now has two tyrants influencing her and fighting with her for control. Pandora is a really mysterious character. We actually don't really know a whole lot about her backstory. But she's kind of this strange woman who looks very innocent, but where a lot of the other Neverborn would prefer to just kill the humans, she likes to torture them. Her crew is really cool because they're mostly made up of different kinds of ghosts, as well as the two children, Candy and Cade, who came out of the box. They're really creepy, and the whole crew has a lot of really annoying and difficult to deal with abilities in the game. But for more information on that, let's go over to Brandon from the Danger Planet, who's going to break it down for us.
Pandora leads the Woe crew, a crew that's primary goal in life is bringing misery to their enemies. The whole crew relies on two primary abilities, Misery and Opportunist. Opportunist lets the Woe model end stunned or their specifically named condition on any model that they are having an opposed duel with, friend or foe, to get a plus flip to that duel. Misery is a once per activation ability that lets the Woe either cause 1 damage or move 2 inches any enemy model that gains stunned or the model's specific condition listed in their Opportunist ability. So almost every model in the crew is about giving out conditions in one way or another, usually stunned, but lots of other conditions as well, and using those conditions to their benefit to make your opponent's models worse and yours better. Candy is a notable henchman for being one of the best in the game for her durability, her completely disgusting, debilitating discard and stunned aura, and she can heal and give fast out to your models, as well as the other nasty tricks that the crew can do. Pandora's totem Poltergeist is also worth a mention, because it has a very large area removal ability for all markers except for strategy markers that can also cause damage to enemy models, but effectively very effortlessly shuts down enemy scheming and marker-based crews and strategies. He also has a negative to willpower aura, and it makes enemies within 6 inches lose their ruthless ability. Pandora herself is the most terrifying model in the game at Terrifying 13, and has Opportunist any condition. Her hallmark ability Self-Loathing that she shares with Candy uses your opponent's best attacks against them, and she can let her models add suits to duels, shuts down enemy movement, and if she's the leader of the crew and an enemy near her tries to activate, she can make a different model in her line of sight have to activate instead, which is an insanely powerful ability. Pandora Tyrant Torn, however, is another beast altogether. She's almost impossible to put down because any opposed duels or damage flips against her treat all plus flips as negative flips, so she's effectively immune to enemy focus. And her bonus action is super, super unique. It allows you to end a condition on any 2 other models near her and give them each a condition that has to be different from each other, but it can be any condition in the game. She also has the ability to summon a Woe minion once per turn on any stunned enemy, or with the trigger, summon back her amazing totem with its negative willpower aura. She has a deceptively good ranged attack that gets stronger when the target is stunned. And finally, she has an attack that moves an enemy model and causes other models to treat a small area near it as hazardous. And combined with her crew's misery movement, you can use that to ungodly effect. So Pandora is a nightmare to play against, and her toolkit is super, super diverse and very rewarding to play well.
Nekima had been forced to live in the shadow of her sister for too long. When their mother Lorelei died, there was a power vacuum, and many of the stronger Nephilim began consolidating their power to try to take over as leader. When the humans showed up, the Neverborn all watched from the shadows until they realized the danger of the humans meddling and the risk of releasing more tyrants. Nekima decided to lead the charge into the city, killing as many humans as she possibly could, and she planned to return victorious and take her place on the throne. But her sister Lilith, the less violent but more cunning of the two, had been planning for this, and she secured enough powerful allies that when Nekima returned, she had already been named the queen. Nekima resented her for this, believing that the strongest of the Nephilim should always be the leader. So over 100 years later, when Titania returned, she saw it as an opportunity. In spite of Titania's reputation, Nekima made an alliance with her in exchange for support when she tried to overthrow her sister. Lilith and her allies saw the attack coming, but Nekima still managed to catch them off guard, and she and her sister faced off, resulting in Lilith being mortally wounded. Now that she's the queen, she has to be aware of threats from all directions, including Lilith's old allies and those still loyal to her, as well as Titania, the tyrants, and the humans. She's a powerful warrior, but with so many threats on her doorstep, she's had to make a few changes to the way that the Nephilim operate in order to maintain a hold on her power. Nekima is a giant demon lady with a big sword. She's really unsubtle about the way she approaches things. She really tends to like to solve all of her problems with violence, and most of the rest of her crew are comprised of other Nephilim, which are also these kind of demon-like creatures. So if you're into that aesthetic, you'll really like this crew. There's actually quite a bit of variety among them now, and one of the really interesting things that they can do is they can actually transform themselves. The young Nephilim can kind of grow up throughout the game and become more and more powerful as you go. But for more information about how that works, let's go back over to Brandon from the Danger Planet, who will tell us a little bit more about Nekima and the Nephilim keyword.
Nekima leads the Nephilim, a bunch of flying monsters that bleed acid and murder indiscriminately. Almost every model in the crew causes everything within 1 inch of it to suffer a damage whenever it takes damage from an action or a trigger through black blood, which is super punishing for melee models to deal with if they don't have evasive or a longer reach. They almost all fly, while some of them have a bonus action, Fly With Me, to move themselves and possibly bring smaller models with them, which makes them very, very fast, and they almost all nearly regenerate at least 1 health whenever they activate, if not more. At the heart of the crew is the ability to grow faster and larger. If the smaller Nephilim kill enemy models or remove corpse markers, which her totem can make once per turn, they'll gain a grow token, and when they gain their second, they can lose them all to replace with the next size up Nephilim minion. Some crews hire very cheaply, intending to grow their models for maximum effect, and some focus on it as like a secondary benefit, but it can be very, very scary when done right, even if it's not the primary focus. And even the smaller Nephilim are fast, they pulse out black blood, they self-heal pretty well, and the young are disgusting in melee. They have built-in plus flips. Crazy guys. Nekima herself is incredibly straightforward as far as masters go. She can charge as many times as she wants, she has a very powerful melee attack with a super powerful trigger Shove Aside, and she can throw the corpses of her enemies for kicks. Nekima Broodmother is very different. As a primarily support master, she's hung up her Living Blade Lorelei in exchange for really focusing on the grow mechanic. She lets all of her Nephilim drop a ski marker whenever they replace with the Relish in Blood ability, and she can even give out grow tokens now, as well as summon Terror Tots to start the process of growing larger Nephilim all over again. She can also let friendly models near her interact as her bonus action, and in general, she's just an amazing support master with tons of healing and a lot of abilities and buffs for her crew. Her models in either version, though, are murder machines with unparalleled mobility and bloodlust, and Nephilim is a super, super good crew for tournament play because of how fast they are and how they kill things extremely well.
When the Neverborn wanted to kick the humans out of Malifaux, a mysterious human woman named Zarya approached them, claiming that she could seal the breach for 100 years. They agreed to cooperate with her, and just as she had told them, she sealed the breach, cutting off the humans' access to their realm. But Zarya had seen the threads of fate, and knew that the humans would be instrumental in making sure the tyrants couldn't come back into power. They needed time to prepare for the humans' return, but they would only have a century. After the time had passed, Zarya worked with Lilith and Pandora to try to manipulate events to make sure the humans wouldn't reopen the portal at Kythera, but things didn't all go according to their plan, and soon several more tyrants were running loose in Malifaux. She's continued to try to manipulate events from the shadows, using her ability to see the future, but eventually she found that these abilities weren't as reliable as she expected. The Fey Queen Titania prevented her from seeing certain events in the future, which allowed Nekima to ambush Lilith and ultimately defeat her sister. In order to save Lilith's life, Zarya decided to entomb her at Nythera, the resting place that had kept Titania alive for centuries, and would do the same for Lilith. With Pandora becoming less and less reliable, Zarya is running out of allies, and her constant efforts to try to unify the gremlins have had inconsistent results, leaving her to turn to other means. Zarya is the swamp hag of Malifaux, and she's really interesting because she ties in with the whole kind of tarot card reading and fate weaving theme of the game. I'm a big fan of her crew. She has a really big keyword, and it tends to be comprised of all types of swamp and bayou related creatures. They're some of the most interesting models in the game for sure, and when you get the whole crew together, they look really awesome. But now let's go back over to Brandon, who's going to tell us a little bit more about how to play Zarya.
Zarya leads the Swamp Fiends, one of the largest and stinkiest keywords in the game. Her crew is a finesse crew through and through, from models that are great schemers with stealth to the Kurgan's unparalleled movement abilities. Her minions excel at playing to their strengths and being really sneaky. The First Mate is an amazingly fast, leapy scheme runner henchman that can pack a punch on an unsuspecting model, but can be kind of fragile, so it's best to use him carefully. Almost all the models in the crew have penetrating stench, which makes an enemy model that activates while engaging them have to discard a card or gain stunned, which is really, really strong for hand pressure or for just turning off their triggers and making them less efficient. Zarya has a defensive trigger that outright ends enemy activations if they attack her with a melee attack against defense, and she can always look at the top card of either player's fate deck whenever an enemy in her line of sight cheats. She can also draw her non-melee actions from friendly swamp fiends that are within line of sight and 12 inches of her, so it allows her to still be offensive while kind of staying hidden and protected if you position her correctly. She has one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, obey ability in the game. And if you have the right triggers, you can either make the target fast and deal them 2 damage, or have them take a second action. And finally, her bonus action makes both players discard their hands and draw 6 cards. And her summon, she gets to summon her totem at the end of any activation by discarding a card, which is when she links it to a model that shares its conditions and damage. Zarya's Swamp Hag, however, changes up the entire game with her ability to let 2 friendly Swamp Fiends anywhere in play copy her non-charged general actions for a discarded card. Her main attack can spike some really high damage and has a really unique execute trigger where she turns the opposed model into a gup. And she has 2 specific actions that are immensely, immensely powerful. The first one is Off the Path, which lets her discard and draw up to 2 cards, and then move the model that she targeted up to 8 inches, depending on how strong the cards she discarded were, whether it's friend or foe. Secondly, she has Lost Knowledge, which lets you not only remove a marker to draw some cards, but it has 2 insane triggers. One of the triggers lets you summon any puppet in the game that costs 4 or less in exchange for the cards that you would draw, which is usually going to be her totem, but it can also be any of the effigies. But the other one is crazy. It's called Sealed Fate, and it forces an unactivated opponent's model to activate next. There's nothing they can do about it. It's not a resisted attack, and they can't stop it in any way. You just have to have a mask in the duel, and it happens. Zarya in general is one of the highest skill cap crews in the game, if not just Neverborn, but she has an amazing toolkit full of unique options, but she's not very durable and really needs to be piloted well to succeed, which makes her very difficult to play, but incredibly rewarding.
In ancient times, Malifaux was inhabited by the Fae, who came in a variety of species. They eventually united under the Queen Titania and lived peaceful and prosperous lives until the rise of the tyrants. These entities used to be Fae until they accumulated so much power that they could create life for themselves. Titania and her people struggled to stand against them, and eventually she was forced to turn to some dark magic, opening up a portal to the realm of death and letting in the grave spirit. This allowed her to destroy the tyrant's physical forms, but her people felt betrayed as she hadn't told them her plan, and soon they decided to cast her out. She was entombed at Nythera, and lay dormant with her Autumn Court for many centuries. After some humans stumbled on her resting place, the Autumn Queen was released, and found the world in a very different condition than she left it. She tried to unite the Neverborn under her rule, but found that they were very hesitant, as everyone knew her reputation as a betrayer of her people. They considered her just as bad as the tyrant she helped to defeat, but with several tyrants on the loose as well, Titania has started consolidating her power, gaining any ally she can find in order to stand against her ancient enemies. Titania is an interesting character because I think it's a really tough question to decide whether she did the right thing in releasing the Grave Spirit and fighting against the tyrants. It seems like it had to be done because the tyrants were getting ready to defeat everyone, but she probably went about it in the wrong way. Her crew is really cool. They're not the traditional fae that you might be used to, but the keyword is comprised of all different kinds of foresty creatures. If you like strange animals and undead humanoid people and a Cthulhu Tyrannosaurus Rex, then this is probably the keyword for you. But on that note, let's go back over to Brandon, who's going to tell us a little bit more about how Titania plays in the game.
Titania is the Fae Queen, who leads her crew of undead forest dwellers through the tangle of her woven hedge. Nearly every model in her crew gets to place down some of the most hard-to-deal-with markers in the game, and many of the models in her crew get to place a marker anywhere on the board at least 2 inches away from other ones immediately after deployment, which allows you to all but shut down anyone who can't ignore concealing or move through severe terrain without a significant penalty. And unlike any marker crews that don't automatically ignore their thing, most of her crews ignore them where it matters, either having attacks that ignore the concealment or can just ignore the severe portion of the movement altogether. Many of her models are also hard to wound because they're undead and can place down more undergrowth as an action on their turn to stay concealed and hinder your opponent. The Waldgeists, and also if she decides to hire the Emissary, have the ability to attack through these markers or any other forest in general, so they work really well to synergize with them. And her Fey Knights and her Doggos are expensive but have very high stats and they're very difficult to put down. Titania's Totem also can morph into any slain minion and enforcer, which is an incredibly powerful ability. And Titania herself is super hard to deal with. She flies, she's hard to wound, and she lets herself or any friendly model near her treat severe damage and red jokers as if they were moderate damage instead. And she can slam her underbrush markers into enemy models to damage them, which in turn makes her pretty decent ranged attack hit harder and more consistently when the target's in severe terrain or near her markers. Titania Autumn Queen, or Tutania, loses some of her damage output for a host of support abilities. Her friendly models near her get +1 to their duels outside their activation, mostly when they're attacked, and she can't make her markers on demand anymore, but now she gets a free one that ignores the usual requirement of not being near other ones at the start of each turn. She also has picked up a really strong heal that doesn't need to flip for an action, a long-range injure and stun attack that can move the model that it targets around, and her signature ability, Behold Her Glory, which lets her once per turn put focus on a model, drop a ski marker next to it if it's friendly, and then potentially drop to 3 cards if she's near a bunch of her own markers. All that aside, the place where she really shines is that once per turn she can upgrade one of her Fey minions into her champion, which lets her draw line of sight for her actions and auras from them, builds in 2 very relevant suits to all of their duels, and lets them chain activate when a friendly model near them finishes. This upgrade takes her Autumn Knights to scary levels, making them some of the most difficult to remove minions in the game, automatically counting them as defense 7 when it's not their activation, because they're always in her aura when upgraded, and building in their automatic strike back resistance trigger is crazy, and it really pushes her crew into the stratosphere.
If you're enjoying this video so far, then be sure to leave it a like and make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming up next. Plus, if you want to help me out and do me a big favor, then share the video with your gaming community, anybody that you think might appreciate it. It helps me out a whole lot. If you'd like to support the channel in other ways, then you can check out the description below where there's a bunch of different links, including the merch store where you can buy Defective Dice merchandise, the weird affiliate link where you can shop on their website and all of your purchases go to support the channel a bit, and the Patreon where you can show your support directly and get a whole bunch of different benefits, including ad-free versions of the videos, early access to videos, voting on upcoming content, and all sorts of other stuff. But with that, let's get right back to the Neverborn. The tyrant Nightmare is the master of the dreaming realm. It was once a pleasant place, but due to his corruption, it's turned into more of a realm of nightmares. He was used to having complete control, until he ran into a boy named the Dreamer. The Dreamer seemed to be able to manipulate the nightmare realm in a way like no one else that Nightmare had encountered. But what was more impressive was that he seemed to be able to manifest himself in Malifaux and bend reality to his will, as if the real world was the dreaming realm. Nightmare decided to befriend the boy so that he could learn more of his secrets. But Dreamer is oblivious, thinking that everything is just a game, made up in a dream. He likes to play games with his friends, most of which involve violence and slaughter. And any person unfortunate enough to bump into the child in Malifaux is not likely to survive the experience. But back on Earth, the Battle of London has shaken up the Dreamer's real life, forcing him to evacuate his hometown, and even seeing his own father die. This has caused him a great deal of stress that has made it hard for him to sleep, and on the occasion when he does fall asleep, he's found that his ability to manipulate reality in Malifaux is greatly diminished. He's still got his friend Nightmare, who he calls Lord Chompybits, but he's started to get suspicious that his old friend is hiding something from him. The Dreamer is a really interesting character in a lot of different ways, but I know somebody who's even more fond of him than I am. So with that, let's go over to John from Malifaux University, who's going to tell us a bit about why you might find the Dreamer interesting.
Hi, this is John from Malifaux University. One of the first crews I ever played with was the Nightmare keyword led by the Dreamer. Like every model I play with, the number one thing that attracts me is the lore. The idea of a psychopathic Earthside child that astrally projects into Malifaux while he sleeps is just cool. And then Lord Chompybits, his totem, being a tyrant intrigued by the Dreamer's abilities and following him around for fun, is even cooler. I really enjoy playing a crew made up of the scary things that go bump in the night, like Teddy, the Carver, Capilius, and others, just for the thematic presence they have on the table. Once the lore of a keyword or model catches my eye, I look into the game mechanics to see if that's how I want to play. The Dreamer is great at burning through your opponent's deck, since most of the Nightmare keyword models have the Terrifying ability, which requires a willpower duel before every action against them. The Dreamer himself also has the Serene Countenance ability, which puts a negative modifier on attacks against him, making a lot of attacks just fail with no opportunity to cheat. The most fun, I think, comes from the Lucid Dreams tactical action many of the Nightmare keyword models have, that allows them to remove cards from the game, making the deck much more concentrated with moderate and severe cards later in the game. The Dreamer's Vivid Nightmares ability forces some of those cards to come back each turn, but if you leave the Dreamer out and let Lord Chompybits be the crew leader, then the deck just gets better and better.
Thanks so much, Don. If you're not familiar with Malifaux University, it's a great channel and resource for learning the rules of the game. It'll be linked down in the description below, so definitely make sure that you check it out. But with that, let's go back over to Brandon, who's going to tell us more about how to play Dreamer in the game.
Dreamer leads the Nightmare crew, full of incorporeal and murdery horrors from other dimensions. The crew's signature mechanic, Lucid Dream, is a bonus action that lets you remove your cards from your deck by revealing the top 3 and choosing one to be set aside out of the game, which is used in different ways depending on which version of Dreamer you're running. But with Dreamer 1 or a henchman-led crew, you'll often want to be removing your weak cards to make your deck flip better and more consistently. Lord Chompybits, his totem, is a henchman beatstick with an amazing melee ability, Trail of Gore, and one of the crew's signature attack actions, Twist Reality, a ranged projectile that can be made to be against defense or willpower depending on the attacker's choice, and it ignores armor and incorporeal. But Mr. Chompy can also use it to teleport into base contact with on your heels. Serena Bowman is a really important support piece for the crew, who has the same attack action as well, but she can also heal and end conditions, and she has Demise Eternal, making her have to be killed twice in the same round or she'll persist. And the rest of the crew sees a number of more flexible options for scheming or murdering or building puppets with Widow Weaver, but you always want to keep some daydreams nearby to lead your other nightmares around the board and keep your Lucid Dream engine going. Dreamer 1 is Neverborn's premier summoner, and has incorporeal and serene countenance and protected nightmare, so even though he has very low health, he's all but unkillable. He also has Twist Reality, and his cricket bat attack can allow him to swap places with another friendly nearby nightmare, like Chompybits, if he gets in trouble. He can also hand out Adversary Nightmare, and he allows his crew to move, gain focus, and gain shielded with some of his other abilities. His summoning, though, is really interesting, because he can summon multiple models, and when he does, they become stunned and buried. At any point after they're summoned, if an enemy fails a willpower duel that's caused by a friendly model, they pop into base contact as they're made manifest, and the Alps will even get a free attack and a free damage on anything they touch in base contact when they pop up, making any terrifying check, willpower attack, or anything all the more scary. Dreamer Insomniac, however, turns everything in this crew on its head. He doesn't summon anymore, except for summoning back Chompybits if he dies. He's no longer incorporeal, and he fundamentally changes a lot of different aspects of the crew. So when playing him, you really need to design a crew around having about 5 or 6 or even more Lucid Dream action models, and you want to focus on removing the higher cards, because when any enemy model activation finishes, If you have 5 or more cards removed from the game, you switch your entire removed pile with your hand and bury Dreamer. Then at the start of each friendly activation, you discard 2 of the now removed cards from play back into your discard pile, and when there aren't any more cards left, you unbury Dreamer near any friendly nightmare. This means that it is trivial to, midway through a turn, have a handful of Severes again, which can be devastating when used to maximum potential. But it also means that you have a really easy time moving Dreamer to basically wherever you want him. He also has gained a really good debuff attack that can do okay damage, an attack that manipulates the enemy deck and can do some damage or summon back Lord Chompy Bits if he's died, and the ability to move your nightmares around and bury themselves in the shadows of their enemies, as well as a bonus action to discard a card to drop a scheme marker into base contact with a nearby nightmare, even if they're insignificant. In either manifestation, Dreamer is a great, very, very flexible crew, but he's really susceptible to enemy crews that can attack buried models, so be very wary playing him against Lady Justice or Tara.
Marcus was a scientist and professor on Earth, but he very much preferred to do hands-on research out in the field. But the types of experiments he liked to do were a bit taboo, and eventually he found his way to Malifaux, where he allied himself with the Arcanists. Even there, he tended to keep to himself, spending his time doing research and experiments on the strange creatures that were native to the other realm. He developed his own magical arts known as chimerancy that allowed him to manipulate the physical forms of living beings. He was even able to de-age himself, and as the people around him got older and older, he began to look younger and younger. His research led him into the Knotwoods, the domain of the Fey Queen Titania, and he knew that a confrontation between him and her would be inevitable. Eventually, the Fey Queen called on him, and the two had their battle. Marcus had gained the upper hand until one of Titania's servants interfered, and soon they all decided to settle down. Having earned each other's respect, Marcus asked Titania for access to some of her ancient magical knowledge, and the Fey Queen granted his request in exchange for an agreement that they would leave each other in peace. Marcus's crew is really interesting and unique looking compared to the other crews in Malifaux. Almost everything in his crew is some sort of strange creature that will look like a creature you might be familiar with from Earth, but with a little bit of a twist. So you got bears with 4 arms, lions with 3 heads, and giant rattlesnakes that could eat people. The crew has a really interesting and fun playstyle. It's actually my favorite crew to play in the game. But for a little bit more about that, let's go back over to Brandon.
Marcus leads the Chimera crew, one focused around strong and fast beasts that have an unparalleled level of flexibility that can change and adapt to suit whatever needs doing at the drop of a hat. His main henchman, Miranda, has some of the most powerful healing in the game, being able to nearly fully heal damaged models if the opponent doesn't kill them in a single activation, which with huge murdery beasts is very hard to do. And there is no shortage of hard-hitting attacks, fast schemers, and support models in this menagerie of beasts that you can hire in his crew. The way to get a lot of flexibility out of his crew is by handing out these different upgrades. There are 5 of them that give out some of the game's best abilities like armor, disguised, stealth, flying, and several of them buff the model's existing attack actions. Many of the models can discard their upgrades as well if they need critical plus flips to be able to hit with some of their attacks, and many of them are able to either attach or switch their upgrades to various actions that they can take. Marcus himself gets to attach an upgrade when he activates or switch it out if he has one, and can hand out his mutation upgrades with his actions. He can also let friendly beasts move or charge during his activation, and then can chain activate into the beasts that he just moved up into the enemy's faces. He also has a unique hiring ability when he is your declared leader, to allow you to hire any beast in his declare faction, which for Neverborn means that some of the Fey beasts or the Swamp Fiend beasts, as well as, I guess, the corrupted hounds from Nephilim, although he has so many powerful in-keyword options that it is often hard to find space. Marcus 2, or Meowcus, changes the game drastically because he lets the models that discard their upgrades near him transfer those discarded upgrades to nearby beasts or chimera models, keeping the upgrade train going. He also has an aura of severe terrain that stops enemies from placing near him, and his melee attack got a lot better. He also gained access to Leap, which is an incredibly powerful movement ability, and he's so fast and aggressive that, combined with the really effective way of doubling down on his crew upgrades, it's almost trivial to have all 10 of them out in the early rounds of the game, and some of the skill of the crew really comes from managing where and when you need those upgrades, or when to discard them.
Lucius Matheson enjoys the fact that no one can tell what he really is. Even Zarya can't seem to figure out Lucius's true nature, or what type of Neverborn he actually is. Titania the Fey Queen is one of the very few who seems to recognize him for his true form, and Lucius likes to use this secrecy to his advantage. He spent years working his way up through the guild, and became the secretary to the Governor General of Malifaux. He manipulated both the guild and the Neverborn, and whether he's truly loyal to anyone but himself is still an open question. When Governor General Kitchener died and was replaced by Governor General Marlowe, Lucius was disappointed to find that the new head of the guild wouldn't be as easily manipulated. On top of that, he didn't seem to respect the more ceremonial parts of his job, nor the luxuries that were available to them as leaders of the guild, two of the few human things that Lucius actually liked. Finding himself on the outs with the guild, he's now decided to walk his own path. And while he wasn't expecting the arrival of the Burning Man, he's decided to use the chaos to his advantage. Lucius is like a cross between a secret agent and a fancy old-fashioned bureaucrat. He's probably the most pompous and narcissistic of all the Masters of Malifaux, but it actually makes him a really interesting character. His motivations are a little bit unclear, but it seems like everything that he does is really just about empowering himself, and he really seems to enjoy looking down on other beings. His crew's also pretty cool because it's split up between lawyers and other members of the guild, and then mimics, which are Neverborn that can kind of change their appearance. It's a very cool looking crew, but for more about how they play in the game, let's go back over to Brandon.
Lucius is a crew that revolves around trickery and deceit. Many of his models have abilities that interfere with the opponent's ability to interact by making it not work for them or cost more, or being able to pick up schemes they drop for bonus effects. The Neverborn side also includes mimics and the doppelganger, which can copy the best attack that you have in your crew, which is most of the time going to be probably like Angel Eyes. And changelings and wide eyes are really, really good scheme runners. Almost every model in Lucius's crew gets to draw a card when any model of higher cost makes it take actions outside of its activation. And then Lucius himself gives you card draw whenever pass tokens are spent by either side. He comes with Arcane Reservoir for an extra card in your hand, and a bonus action that makes your opponent show you their hand and discard 2 cards of Lucius's choice, and then replace them with cards from their deck. When you look at Lucius Matheson Dishonorable, or Tucius, he really kicks things up a notch. He gets to drop a free scheme marker at the beginning of every round, which buffs his models when they're near it, and he trades in a little bit of his card advantage and durability for the ability to teleport all over the board with Secret Passage, which obviously lets him score and scheme in ways that are very difficult to stop because he can make it almost anywhere in a single activation. But his teleport can irresistibly stagger people near where he shows up, and then he can hit them with his dagger-like claw that hits even harder against staggered models and can ignore hard to kill and demise, which makes him a huge liability for any crew that likes to keep their models alive.
Back in ancient times, one group of the Fae, called the Gigants, was united under their leader, Euripides. He was known for his savage brutality, and he led his people on many conquests until he encountered Titania. He and the Autumn Queen clashed for days, costing Euripides his eye, and leading to a mutual respect between the two. Titania then decided to give Euripides the gift of foresight, and the great warrior pledged his eternal loyalty to the queen. His brutal ways were behind him, and soon he and his people drifted to the north to live in the mountains before Titania was imprisoned. When she returned, Euripides heard her call and began to lead his people back down from the mountains. Euripides had felt the presence of the Burning Man even before the mysterious entity made its way to Malifaux, and with the arrival of Pain and the strange dreams, the Gigant found that he was no longer able to see the future. As the Burning Man's madness tried to take him, he consulted with Titania, who taught him how to carve powerful runes into his own skin in order to ward off the Burning Man's influence. Neither of them knew exactly what to expect with the Burning Man's arrival, but they both knew it would be worse for everyone else than it would be for them. Euripides is another one that stands apart from a lot of the other crews in Malifaux. He's one of the few characters that come from ancient times, back when the Tyrants were still wandering around, and his crew even looks a lot different than everything else in Malifaux. Pretty much everything in his crew is some sort of giant or troll-like creature, and they tend to be pretty big compared to most Malifaux models. But because of that, they look really stunning on the table. And I also found that they were a ton of fun to paint, mostly because of how unique they look. But with that, let's go back over to Brandon again, who's going to tell us a little bit more about how Euripides and the Savage keyword plays in the game.
The Savage crew is a brute force, club them over the head crew that relies on being very hard to kill. Almost every model in the crew has it, including both versions of the Master, and they get tankier if they hang out in their native habitat next to ice pillars. Many of the models in the crew can make them. Almost every model heals one and gets shielded when they end their activations near them, and some models can, like the Cyclops and Gargant, use them to hinder your opponent's actions, damage or stagger them, and Thune, the crew's henchman, has a powerful trigger that can bury your opponent's models into them that doesn't allow them to get out of it until they destroy it with one of their other models. Besides the ice pillar mechanics, almost every model in the crew lives by the old ways, which thematically is the models looking to the past for guidance, and mechanically takes any duel that has no plus or minus flips and makes the model suffer 1 damage to flip the top card of their discard pile as though it was the card from the top of their deck. It's super, super good when you're punching opponents, which this crew loves to do with its big, meaty fists, and cheats in severe cards for damage, because then you can just use that severe card that you cheated to hit them again with your next AP. But it can also make avoidable attacks in simple duels basically cost 1 damage to avoid, but learning when using it is worth it is really the trick here. The original Euripides, as well as Thune, both have intuition, which lets you forecast their activations for them quite a bit, and Euripides makes anyone who dies near him drop ice pillars instead of what they normally drop to further protect and buff your crew and hinder your opponents. He has a super strong melee attack. He can make a bunch of ice pillars on his turn that pulse out damage when they show up, and he can blip around the board with his bonus actions trigger to place in base contact with any ice pillar within 8 inches of him. Euripides, or Euripidos, Old One Eye, trades a little bit of his power for a few different options. He can make an ice pillar and remove other markers near it to heal nearby models, and make them into more ice pillars. He has Avalanche, which is an absolute stunner of an action, allowing you to yeet your own or enemy models 5 inches, ignoring models and terrain, which can damage enemies and heal friends. But the real trick is his gut magic, or Herpatomancy. Every time a friendly model near him takes damage, he gets a token, which then you can spend whenever a friendly model takes a duel to look at and discard any non-jokers from either player's top 2 cards. So he basically beats you to death and then uses your entrails dice the cake of his victory.
After being weakened by Titania and the Grave Spirit, many of the tyrants began trying to claw back some of their power. Shazul was a menace, and fed on the blood of his victims, causing him to get stronger and stronger the more that he killed. It seemed like the inhabitants of Malifaux at the time, the true Nephilim, would not be able to stand against his onslaught. But soon a plan came together, and the black blood ritual was performed, transforming the red blood that satiated Shazul and flowed through all of their veins into a black ichor. This would no longer empower the tyrant, and allowed the true Nephilim to finally turn the tide of the battle. But one of the true Nephilim didn't seem to be affected by this ritual. Castor was one of the oldest and most powerful of all the true Nephilim, and after the ritual, he found that no matter how much he ate, he was never satiated. He went starving for a long period of time, until in a fit of starvation, he finally attacked one of his own. It turned out that the only way he could nourish himself was through the black blood of his own brothers and sisters. Not wanting to continue this practice, he decided to entomb himself, laying in a suspended state, still alive, but not needing to feed on his own people. He's only awakened in times of great need, and he has to gorge himself on black blood in order to regain his power upon waking. He had supported Lilith's claim to the throne before going back to sleep last time, but now with all the chaos going on in Malifaux, Nekima has woken him up to seek his help. Castor is the newest master in the Neverborn, and he's a really interesting one. He's kind of like a Nephilim vampire, and while he has some things in common with the Nephilim keyword, there's a lot of different stuff going on in his crew. His models tend to look a little bit more undead and zombie-like, and it's brought us some really interesting new models and playstyles to the game. His totem is actually a living blade, which is a really powerful sword that some of the Neverborn have. But in this case, Marathon actually goes off on its own and fights independently of Castor, which is really cool. And also, it can't die, which is kind of interesting too. But with that, one more time, let's go back over to Brandon, who's going to tell us more about Castor and the return keyword.
Castor leads the returned crew. Having recently arisen from his torpor, his models are all about healing and moving forward. The crew's main mechanic is overhealing. Almost every model in the crew gets a bonus when they overheal, and many of the models heal at the start of their activation, or can take damage at the start of their activation to allow a friendly model to heal. Usually the bonus is extra mobility, but some models have different options. The crew has a lot of ways to pump out damage and is really focused on being sort of around each other and near each other to gain the benefit of overheal buffs, as well as a number of other auras like the Urn Bearers being able to turn overheal into shielded and then eventually focus and more healing, or the Unseelie engines protecting the crew from enemy non-melee attacks and stun. Gwyll is an amazing support piece that can turn any amount of healing down to 0 as long as it's in Gwyl's line of sight and make it count as an overheal. And he has a bunch of other support abilities and card manipulation abilities. The other henchman, Atharak, can put up wards that protect the crew from ranged attacks and give out shielded when friendly models overheal near them, making them more durable. Castor's totem is really interesting, Marathene, in that it can't die or take damage as long as Castor is in play, and if he dies, you lose it as well, but it has an okay attack that heals Castor equal to the damage it deals, and it can remove enemy ski markers as an action, but it never counts as being engaged or engaging, and anyone can move through it, and it can move through other models. Castor Awakened allows his models near him to interact in the end phase, which is incredibly powerful, as usually it can't be stopped at that point, or interacted with in any way. And he has a pretty good melee attack that can heal himself, and he has one of the nastiest debilitation attacks in the game in Dominate, that stuns and staggers an enemy non-master, and also can let them take a general action like Charge, unhindered by the stagger, or Castor's models. And Castor Awakened lets Marathene move and drop a ski marker as his bonus action, as well as allowing him to pulse out damage from it whenever he overheals. Castor Fervent, however, is much less into scheming and much more into murder. He's grown terrifying and ruthless, and ignores severe and hazardous terrain and can move through models now because he's so large. He also ignores friendly and black blood caused damage, and instead, once per activation, can heal one from it, triggering his overheal. His melee attack has gotten a lot scarier, and gets blasts automatically, 2 of them whenever he charges, and he can teleport into one of those blast markers. He also has an attack that just straight up abducts enemy models and puts them in base contact with him after he pushes 6 inches in any direction, and his bonus ability allows Marathene to teleport and then charge. Altogether, the Return Crew is a very, very scary opponent, and they heal like it's nobody's business.
And that's it for the 9 existing masters for the Neverborn faction. Hopefully this video has helped you pick out which of these masters is most interesting to you, and definitely get down in the comments below and let me know which of them you decided on and if you changed your mind after watching the video. If you're going to buy into any one of these crews, then consider using the weird affiliate link that's in the description below when you make your purchase. It's just like making a normal purchase on their website, but it lets Weird know that I sent you, and they show me a little bit of support on the back end, so I'd appreciate it. I want to say a huge thank you to the Danger Planet, as always, for supporting me on these videos and talking about the gameplay. And I also want to send a special thanks to John from Malifaux University for his contribution. Make sure you check out Malifaux University. It's a really great channel, especially if you're getting into the game as a new player. That'll be linked below as well. On top of all that, I want to thank everybody who submitted pictures of their painted models for me to use in the video. I think it's really cool to be able to show off different styles of painting for all the models in the different crews. And if you'd like to submit your own painted models, we still have the Resurrectionist and the Outcast coming up in this series. So shoot me an email at this email address and be sure to let me know how to credit you. And finally, special thanks to the Extremely Cool Kids tier on Patreon, the Steam Powered Scoundrels, Dogmatized, and Devin. And thanks for watching.